The 90s was the beginning of the internet age. For the first time, technology made the process of copying and sharing media with people from around the world as seamless as it was instantaneous. But of course, people took advantage of this potential, and digital piracy was abundant. Pirated content was available for free or at extremely cheap rates. And because pirated content was just as good and even more accessible than original content, industries were scared they wouldn't be able to compete. This fear led to the development of digital rights management laws and systems, or DRMs. DRMs exist in the background of the majority of programs. They are designed to monitor and control what users do with the media that they purchase. They limit the freedoms users are able to exert over their property with the express purpose of preventing piracy, but there is no clear evidence that DRMs have any effect on the availability of pirated content. What is clear, however, is that DRMs have transformed the very idea of what it means to own something in society today. Owning something used to imply that you could pass it down, sell it, trade it, give it away, use it at your leisure, make copies of it, or even destroy it. But because DRMs have expressly limited or prohibited our ability to use our property in this way, we don't really own it anymore. We borrow it, and since it's not technically ours, it can easily be taken away. DRMs were meant to protect copyright holders' right to fair compensation. One of the most famous cases of artists fighting to protect this right in the context of digital media was the case of Metallica versus Napster in 1999. Metallica argued that Napster was a piracy service, since hundreds of thousands of their fans were able to obtain illegal copies of their work using Napster's platform for free. Napster argued that they had never intended their site to be used for that purpose, and that it always was meant to build communities of music lovers. But courts sided with Metallica, and other artists followed suit. Napster went bankrupt in 2002, but ironically, even though Napster went bankrupt and DRMs are prevalent in society today, they haven't seemed to help protect artists' rights to fair compensation. Spotify, for example, a DRM-protected music streaming service, only pays artists half a cent per stream, and even popular artists have to haggle with the company over royalty fees. Unlike Napster, media protected by DRM software doesn't allow users to copy and share or even access their digital media freely. Programs and applications that make use of DRMs, like Spotify, Google, Amazon, and iTunes, almost always have users agree to a terms of service agreement that outlines specifically what users are and are not allowed to use their programs for, and what they are and are not allowed to do with their media. Most terms of service agreements are similar to each other. They specifically prohibit users from violating copyright laws and typically state that DRMs will operate in the background while users are logged in order to monitor what they're doing. Companies reserve the right to ban people from using their services if they suspect users of violating any terms and conditions outlined in the agreement. While terms of service agreements behave like a contract, unlike a contract, they can be arbitrarily changed even after the agreement was made. If they are changed, users are forced to agree with the updated terms of service, lest they lose everything they purchased from the site. Traditionally, if a shopkeeper changes their store's policies, you don't stand to lose everything you bought from them before. But if you buy something off of a DRM-protected service, you do. For someone who has accrued an expansive library of music on iTunes or Kindle books on Amazon, that could mean losing what would be the equivalent of thousands if it existed as physical media. While users consent to DRMs monitoring what they do under the guise of preventing piracy, DRMs do not necessarily restrict themselves to policing unlawful behavior. In the 90s and early 2000s, both physical and digital purchases were much more anonymous, But today, companies have realized that consumer behavior is marketable, so they track everything. Someone who buys a book from a bookshop using cash can do so with relative anonymity. But someone who buys a Kindle book off of Amazon has allowed the software to record when the book was purchased, where the customer was when the book was purchased, what the customer was looking at around the time they made their purchase, other people that were nearby when they made their purchase, when they started reading what they purchased, how long they spent reading what they purchased, and innumerable other data points that may indicate why the user made their purchase and what else might influence them to make additional purchases. This information is used to bombard users with specific, targeted advertisements, and is a big part of why people on the internet everywhere have become so acquainted with phrases like frequently bought together, customers also bought, you might also like. DRM software is by no means the only thing contributing to this infringement on user rights, but because it is permissible for such software to exist and monitor and control what users are doing, they are contributing to it in a non-negligible way. You could argue that DRMs are necessary because they make it more difficult to pirate copyrighted content, even though it's inconvenient for the average user. But there's little evidence to suggest DRMs have actually prevented piracy. Napster went bankrupt, but in its place, another file sharing service called Rhapsody quickly emerged. Hundreds of sites like it pop up every day. If someone is willing to look, pirated content is easily found. And when DRM software is too difficult to circumvent, nothing stops pirates from using tape recorders and other less technical means of copying content. The real threat to artists was always the internet's potential for mass distribution, because the ability to record has always existed. When DRM software is not too difficult to circumvent, however, more serious problems emerge. Hackers can then not only access the media they were trying to protect, but the precious user data as well. I liken the relationship between DRM-protected agents who distribute creative content and consumers of said content to the relationship of lords and peasants in medieval Europe. Amazon, Google, Apple, and other massive companies like them hold all the cards. Content creators are paid a pittance, and consumers trade in their money, rights, and identities for the permission to access digital media. Meanwhile, the corporations are free to exploit users and enforce stricter and stricter restrictions on their services. Just as feudal lords owned the land and everything on it, these companies own the content. Just as peasants could use the land in exchange for labor and services, we are allowed to access the content in exchange for our money and our data, which is not always effectively protected. If piracy isn't deterred, artists aren't being fairly compensated, and user rights are being chipped away at, it stands to reason that the agents that distribute creative content are the only agents who are really benefiting from digital rights management.